Hello, everyone. My name is Mubashir Tazimul, and I'm your host of Unpacking Islamophobia. Thank you for joining us today. We will be discussing a recent documentary focused on the Muslim American experience. As you may all know, this year also marks the 25th anniversary of the deadly September 11th attacks, a day that significantly shaped and altered the lives of Muslim Americans. While we mourned and were shocked by the attacks, quickly became a community under suspicion. Our loyalties and belonging were questioned, and millions of us were rendered guilty for crimes we didn't commit, simply because the perpetrators shared the same faith. And in many of the ensuing conversations and debates that followed, Muslims were the central topic, but were rarely given a space to have our voices heard. Our lives, our faith, and our very identity became legitimate topics of discussion, but we were rarely allowed to speak for ourselves. The Muslim American community is not a monolith. It's one of the most diverse in the country, with individuals coming from different racial, ethnic, and economic backgrounds. Yet, despite that diversity, Muslim Americans have a shared similar experience in the post 9/11 context, one that largely involves issues of identity, belonging, and experiences of Islamophobia. Today, we have Sabeen Sadiq, a stand-up comic, actor, and writer based in New York, and Aida Alami, a Moroccan reporter who has written extensively on Muslims and Islamophobia. Together, they've created Storytellers, Muslims, Community, and Culture in America, a documentary that captures Muslims' lived experiences, weaving in stories about Islam in America and how Muslims were impacted in their day-to-day lives following 9/11. As we also just marked the 250 years of American independence, it's worth noting that the documentary specifically highlights the influence and integral role of Muslims have played throughout American history. And while it touches on heavy topics like racism, Islamophobia, and government surveillance, it also incorporates comedy into vibrant storytelling, conveying to the listener an authentic and natural portrayal of what it means to be Muslim American. Sabine and Ida, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Of
And
course.
we'll jump right in. Sabine, your own story, growing up as a quote, secret Muslim in Chicago, opens a documentary. What made you want to start there with something very personal rather than easing into it with broader context?
I mean, I guess I wanted to show the start of I think what made me feel the need to talk about being Muslim on stage. Why it was so important for me to own it is because in the Chicago suburbs, growing up in gosh, the whitest neighborhood in America, it feels. Um it was like a lot I really felt like I had to hide the biggest part of me. And it wasn't fair and I didn't have words for it at the time. I just had deep feelings of okay, don't let them know. Don't let them know anything. Even there's so much good, right? Like there's so much faith and beauty and like hopefulness, and the way my mom taught me Islam was so beautiful. Like every day she'd be like, did something good happen? Go thank God. Like thankfulness being built into the religion, and because I was so scared of showing myself as being Muslim, I couldn't share the beautiful parts. And um I feel sad that I wasn't able to be myself completely. So it feels like now I have gone the other direction where I'm like, this is what I'm going to talk about all the time. You're going to hear about this constantly. You're going to know so much about this. You're going to know everything about me being Muslim and you're going to like it. It's like I overcorrected for good reason. So I think that's definitely why I started with just baby Sabine, so scared to talk about being Muslim, but feeling American in all the other types of ways, except for that one way. Why can't that way be American too? That's so frustrating because it is American too, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think one of the things that um, I enjoyed when listening to your story is that it humanized the experience. Often, when we talk about the post 9/11 context, we have articles and journal articles and reports and these big studies, and we talk about hate crimes and discrimination, but rarely do we really get like the in-person experience of what it was like, especially as a young person, coming of age during that moment and what identity was. And I think talking about the feeling rather and the part that you said where it was hard to name what it was, but there was a feeling there. And that's something I think many Muslim Americans can relate to, something I related to growing up in the post 9/11 context of there was a feeling of being the other and not knowing how that came about, especially as a child of why am I pitted as this or hearing Islam and Muslims on the news constantly and that rhetoric being so different from your own personal experience in your family and your household and the wider community. So I think starting with that very personal story eases people into the bigger topics and the bigger discussions that we often have in this arena.
Yeah. Well,
And
I was gonna say, did I mention the story of like Ida, you know the story about Osama, my
I
family
do.
friend? Okay. Did we mention that in the doc? I can't remember.
We didn't use it, but I know that we just couldn't stop laughing when we
I mean,
recorded that.
feel
Okay,
free
so
to bring it
this
up
one,
here.
this is just a funny story that Ida loves, and I was like, this is actually hilarious, and I've been trying to turn it into a joke for a while, but this was like a big thing that happened during like right after 9/11, right? I'm in 6th grade, and like I remember going home and not understanding like how this was going to impact me or what was happening or anything at all, right? I was just a kid that had to go home early. That's it. That's all I knew. So I go home early and my mom looks shaken up, pretty disturbed. And the first thing she tells me is, "You know your brother's friend, Osama?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course. Yeah, his bud. I don't care about him." She's like, "Well, he's Sami now. From now on, when he calls, if anyone saw me, got it?" And like I didn't understand. I was like, okay, okay, I guess he's doing a name change. Like it took a while for me to connect the dots because I didn't know why he was changing his name. I didn't know that, oh God, that's like a dangerous name to have now. Like all of these things were things I had to learn and understand over time. And we've called him Sami ever since. Like just kind of like stuck. Isn't that
So
crazy?
he still saw me to this day.
He is Sami.
And I think to himself,
And I think that that story also captures of trying to figure out belonging and identity and safety. Safety
Yeah.
was a big, big thing. And whatever, especially immediately after 9/11, safety was a huge thing of what can we do to make sure that we don't get targeted? Because there were stories, and I remember hearing stories of, we have informants in our mosques of people randomly getting arrested. And I'm really young at this time, but I hear these stories around me, and you're trying to make sense of, well, why? Why is this happening? I think why was the big question that we constantly had. And it's hard to understand forms of racism and what was Islamophobia at that young of an age to be like, well, why am I being targeted when someone else did that just because we share the same faith? That's a bit strange. But yeah, that is, thank you for sharing that story. Um,
Yeah, I had to.
you had to.
Ida, you have spent years reporting on Muslim communities, and I have followed your work for years, and you do brilliant work. And I think a lot of your work really brings in the human story. You really try to focus on the human impact. What gap in the existing coverage made you feel that this project needed to exist?
Right. Well, first of all, thank you for speaking about this project. It's really important to us to get more people to think about these questions and kind of question their own biases and what they know and so on. And it was a really long journey to get to Storytellers. We started with my team, we started thinking about this maybe 4 years ago. And we just realized in many conversations with the producer and the executive producer and so on, oh, it's actually going to be the 25th anniversary of 9/11. So it was this thing, do we care that it's going to be? Do we use it in whatever project we're going to do and so on? And one of the early things I felt strongly about is after all these years reporting on the aftermath of terrorist attacks on Muslim communities in the West, and how there was this change where all of a sudden Muslims in many Western countries realized, well, we're conditional citizens. So what does it mean? There was a big switch, before and after, and a lot of my reporting was looking at how laws have changed, at systemic racism, and so on. But I always tried, as you say, to find someone who would pull an audience that wouldn't necessarily pay attention to these stories. And that has been really the first thing we thought about is who's going to be the voice of this documentary. And I really I had early on this idea that it should be a comedian because um, one of the questions that kept coming to me was, can Muslims finally be funny 25 years after 9/11? Which sounds a bit abstract of a question, but essentially what it means is, can we not have to apologize to be Muslim? And I even see this with the mayor of New York City, with Zohran Mamdani, it feels like he's constantly on his best behavior to show that Muslims don't get angry. Muslims are he's like he really it's interesting because his father wrote Good
Mhm.
Muslim, Bad Muslim, or sorry if I'm mixing up the title, but he really represents the good Muslim. He's a good husband, and he's a good friend, and he's warm, and he's smiling all the time. And it was like, can we do this thing where we just show people that Muslims are just people, which is, you know what I'm saying? And so the thing is, through comedy, I think, and Yasmin says it really well in the documentary, is comedy opens people's hearts. And we were looking for a comedian who wasn't making the stereotypical jokes on Muslims that I'm so tired of hearing. And so I started asking around me, like, who do you know who has Islam part of their comedy routine, but not in a way that's cringy? And people kept on talking about Sabine. And actually, I met Sabine, and she's the only comedian I met. And instantly, it was like, oh my God, this is gonna work. I remember we had breakfast. I don't know, Sabine, if you remember our first breakfast, and I was like, oh, I feel
Mm-hmm.
so inspired by her story and her background, and I think comedy was the perfect way into this, and Sabine was very generous with sharing her personal story, and everyone else that was brought in was so authentic and candid in talking about what it meant. And it's a complicated balance to find an interesting way to talk about Muslims, that where you don't try to do the good Muslim representation, but also you're staying away from the usual stories around security, around surveillance, terrorism. And that balance, trust me, is very hard. It took honestly years of we've had consultants on the project. We had so many meetings, so many brainstorming sessions. I know at the end it's like this less than an hour doc, and but it was so much thinking about, for me, and that's one of the things I really conveyed to Dan O'Donnell, who produced the documentary, is I want something that even Muslims will find interesting to listen to.
Yeah, and that is often I think when it comes to a lot of work in this space of Islamophobia, um, it almost comes off as we're trying to convey and convince others of this issue and to care about this issue at the expense of the Muslim experience itself. And I think what the documentary does is it touches on those topics, on those heavy topics. It talks about surveillance and discrimination, and I think Yasmin, the other comedian who talks about the hijab incident, and those are big topics, but it does it in a way where that's not the only defining thing about being Muslim. And it also, comedy, I think, allows people, it like breaks the ice. And so when you have that, when you get people to laugh, they're more willing to listen and just have a more open-minded conversation. And I think the documentary can be used as a starting point to have bigger conversations, to get people, both Muslim and non-Muslim, talking about this in a much more holistic manner rather than just a very rigid and heavy and sad and scary sort of discussion. And Ida, you said that it took years to get to this. Um, I think that is representative of a lot of projects that we undertake when we talk about Muslims, whether we write about it. When it comes to me writing about articles, I know I will just look at words over and over again to make sure um, it's exactly what I'm trying to convey, just because we're under a microscope, not from just the outside, but also wanting to feel authentic in that storytelling, especially when it comes to individual experiences rather than a broader, like contextual, a broader sort of um, subject. But I mean, all those years definitely paid off. I think the documentary does such a wonderful job. Like I've said, of looking at those topics that I look in my research all the time, but doing it in a manner that's just so easily accessible for everyday individuals. We've been talking about comedy, and Sabine, you incorporate comedy seamlessly throughout the documentary. You bring in humor into conversations that are often difficult to hear and have. What role do you believe comedy can play in our efforts to dispel harmful narratives so often promoted about Muslims and Muslim communities?
Well, I feel like when you just said that we were under a microscope, like that just like really hit me for a second. And I was like, dang, like when I'm doing stand up, I I definitely am looking at words too. Like I am looking at my own stuff and I'm like, wait a minute, okay, like I'm not painting this in like a weird light, right? Like I'm not doing something that can make things worse for us, right? Like these are things that I'm automatically thinking. Like I'm not even consciously doing it anymore, but I'm doing it. You know? Like because I do feel that. Like do feel like all eyes are on me about this. And it's not that I want to do the thing like that I was talking about of like, just being so like we're perfect and like everything's great and like I want to show me being a mess also. My goal with comedy has shifted so much. At first it was like, hey, here's a Muslim story. We're like you. We're just people. We're just freaking people. Like and now as I get older, I feel like I'm allowing myself to be messier on stage, to be like, not only are we people, but we're also can be a mess too. We can also go through this and we can go through that. We have mental health issues in the family, just like you. Guess what? Isn't that crazy? Like, I feel like a lot of my stuff was really directed to white audiences for a while. And it felt like I was talking to the people that I went to high school with. I think like I honestly I feel like I haven't ever like really said that, but like I do think that a lot of my material has been very much like talking to like the girls in high school that just didn't know me or like didn't get it or like thought I was weird or like not cool, but I'm just out there in high school just trying to like hide myself. Like, that takes work. It takes like to really just make yourself unseen because you're scared of the judgment. And I think a lot of my stand up is literally a reaction to that upbringing. But comedy, honestly, like you make someone laugh, they're connecting with you like automatically. They don't even know it. They're just like, they're laughing, they're having a good time. They understood something that you said, and they're going to carry that with them. Maybe they're going to understand another Muslim person in their life in a different way now. It feels like, it's like a grassroots thing. I'm like, slowly shaping minds from like each comedy show. But then I started to grow like a good Muslim fan base eventually, and I was like, yes, my people are here too. Like seeing like hijabis in the front row at a comedy show at New York Comedy Club, I get so happy. I'm like, yes, girl, it's for you too. This is for all of us. And
Mhm.
not just for you, it's for the white people, it's for the everybody's, it's for black people, it's for every group of people. It's opened up so much. Like I want my material not only to talk to the girls I went to high school with, but now to just absolutely everyone. You know, it's like really just owning being Muslim at this point, and that's it, and connecting with other people.
Yeah, and I think the part where you said about um, almost censoring yourself in the beginning on stage and talking to a specific audience It's this role that is placed upon us, but I think sometimes we also just end up nat just subconsciously doing is becoming a spokesperson. So when we talk about our own stories, we're constantly thinking about the wider community. Is this my personal story just reconfirming a stereotype that's out there?
Mm,
Um, we unfortunately aren't functioning in a um, or functioning within a wider system. And now with social media, you obviously get clips that go viral and people can take it the way they want to take it without understanding the wider context of your story. But again, I think to the part where Aida, you talked about Zoran Mamdani and the good Muslim, bad Muslim, and Sabine, you're talking about how in the beginning of your comedy you wanted to dispel these notions that these girls in high school had of you. It's almost as if constantly trying to present ourselves in a certain light to a outside audience. But I think as growth happens, it's almost like, well, staying authentic to yourself and storytelling is the best way to do that. I think with Mamdani, it's also him being a political figure. I think he's so aware of his persona and how he presents himself because he is being nitpicked and everyone's scrutinizing, seeing what he's going to say next or do next or who he's meeting and all those sorts of things, and he knows he's under the microscope as well. And so I think one of the other things, Sabine, you talk about is this high school thing. I think that's something everyone can relate to, no matter how old you are. You remember your high school experience, like that stays with you. And sometimes I think we're still constantly trying to prove to that high school experience those stories of like, I'm not weird, I'm not different, I'm not this, I'm not that, So I think that's something everyone can relate to.
I agree. I totally agree. I think everyone in high school is a little bit feeling otherized anyway. So
Mhm.
it's like, if this is something that I probably should talk about high school a little bit more on stage, but that because that's been the subtext. But like now I'm like, I should openly be like, and I hated Katie. I should just do that, like a whole set calling out every single person. That would be insane.
I think it'd be very relatable.
amazing.
I really do. Not just for Muslims, but not every single person at your show or watching your videos. It'd be very relatable.
So true.
Um, And now in a really big turn, which is present throughout the documentary as well. We're laughing and stuff, but we're also talking about these hard topics. As I mentioned, we're marking 25 years since 9/11 and the war on terror that followed. And Ida, you've covered this in a lot of your reporting about securitization and the impacts on Muslims, especially after terrorist attacks and harmful policies and programs that cast Muslims and Muslim Americans as a suspect community. In the past 25 years, we've seen repeated civil rights violations by authorities, politicians, public figures. Um, uh, but by authorities. And politicians and public figures have pushed bigoted rhetoric. And there's been real world violence against Muslim communities, most recently, the mosque attack in San Diego. How did that 25-year backdrop shape the way you approached telling these stories?
Right. I have my own personal story with 9/11 in the sense that I'm not from the US, but I was applying to college the year of 9/11 and from Morocco. And Morocco was one of the countries that, you know, was looked at closely by the US government. And so first of all, I moved to the US. And the first thing that happens to me when, you grow up in Morocco, Muslim majority country, you don't really think about what it means to be Muslim. And this is everyone's Muslim. You hear it's in the air. You hear the call to prayer, like the food is already halal everywhere. But what I mean is like it's not something you even think about. And I moved to New York, and one of the first thing I had to do was stand in line at Federal Plaza in downtown Manhattan, which I didn't even understand why. I just remember I arrived at JFK and they were like, you have to go stamp this in this address. And I was 18 years old. I didn't even understand. This is like 2 months before the invasion of Iraq. And years later, as an 18-year-old, I just went and waited in line for 5 hours. And I just realized later that I was on the registry, but in the moment, it didn't even, you know, register that I was being profiled as a Muslim because it was whatever. I didn't think about it. I was too young to be too aware. Um, and later, I started paying attention to this, and I remember just being in New York City in the years after 9/11, the invasion of Iraq, all the aftermath of 9/11, on the Middle East and so on. And I started paying attention to Muslims here in a way that for me, even as a foreigner and as a journalist, was so interesting because I was thinking, how are they making it work? Honestly, it's because when when I go back home, it's not even a question. Like no, everyone's like you don't even think about it. And that was one of the early questions, like how 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 do you survive in a society that's so violent against people who have the same faith as you? Really, that was really the very first thing, and that carried my projects, in France or other places. It was really me as a foreigner trying to understand how are people able to do it. And even though that wasn't my personal lived experience, I thought it was always really, really important to tell these stories. And then comes the making of Storytellers. And again, we could have gone into a million different directions. And one of the things that kind of worked out really well is have people with different backgrounds, but kind of doing the same thing, which is telling these stories that no one knows or that, that are funny, interesting, historical or whatever, it's all these like quirky details and interesting stuff. And then kind of 9/11, to be completely honest, kind of happened because of the timing of the release of the documentary. And then Mamdani ended up being elected. And you know how journalism works. Sometimes there's so much serendipity in the sense that, we couldn't have predicted that Mamdani would get elected the year of the release and all of these things. And we kind of adapted to the moment. And one of the things was, I remember for me vividly, one of the moments that really made me very emotional during the recording was when we were at the 9/11 memorial with Assad, and he got really emotional telling the story of that first responder who for months was demonized in the media when he actually died saving lives. And I remember that moment, I felt so many emotions. I felt so, and I was like, okay, we need the listeners to know, really deeply in a way that's not statistics, that's not about laws, that, you can have all the reports, all the things, but it's like, how do we viscerally get them to that point to understand, like, how crazy it is that we live in a society where you have a first responder who dies saving lives, and then for months people are thinking of him as one of the terrorists. And yeah, so that carried a lot of the effort in making this.
And speaking of Asad that you just mentioned, I thought that his segment and the NYC tour guide that he did such a brilliant job of capturing the complex and deep roots of a vibrant Muslim community in America, specifically in New York. But we have these stories across the country. He highlights the history of Muslims in New York, and he weaves in the harder realities of discrimination and scrutiny and suspicion, and tells his own story, which I knew about because I know Asad, but I think a lot of people don't know of his own experience. Of a post 9/11 government policy, specifically surveillance. And it was just so, I don't know, the word to describe came up was icky when he talks about this person that becomes his friend. But also just for me personally, it spoke to fears I had growing up of, who do you trust? And even, in this day and age, there are still policies in place that here in the UK, we have the Prevent program where public officials, whether it be teachers or healthcare professionals, have to report individuals, including children, if they see, quote, signs of extremism. And that, your privacy, your safety, um, is not guaranteed. And it makes you as a Muslim have to figure out how to navigate that world where you are cautious and you are and because of what you've heard other people go through or what you have may have gone through previously. Um, this is for both of you. Can you talk about how that segment came together and why his story felt like the right one to talk about both the complex and vibrant history of Muslims in the country, but also the harder realities of being Muslim American?
Like I said, it took years of brainstorming to get to this point, and we could have gone into a million directions. And we had a list of potential people to interview, of potential stories, and at the same time, the documentary is part of a larger project on reporting on Muslim culture. So there were all these other print stories being produced. And I remember in my notes, I think I said it's from one of my conversations early on doing research. Someone was like, "Oh, there's this interesting kid from from Brooklyn doing these stores," and he actually was, I think in my notes it's like won a lawsuit against the NYPD, and this and that, and he may be running for office one day or something. That's what the person who mentioned him to me the first time said, and it was like, okay, this is. And then after that, I also teach journalism, and I took my students on a tour of Muslim Harlem, and Asad was our tour guide, and started, like, in my conversations with the producer, we started thinking about this thing. Oh, let's open it where, because one of my early questions when I pitched this documentary was, Muslims have been here for centuries. Can we make a documentary that shows that? Because it's so annoying how in pop culture you have this otherization of Muslims constantly. And I'm sorry, I'm going to digress for a second, but the first time I came to the US, I was 7 years old, or 6 or 7 years old. I don't remember exactly. And I was here during the summer. And there was that Sally Field film, Never Without My Daughter, about the kid getting abducted in Iran. And I remember I was so shocked as a kid because it was so Islamophobic. But of course, I didn't have the words to explain, what the film was. But but I remember going back home and being so obsessed with how Americans view Muslims, and that kind of and then you start paying attention as you grow older, and you're like, yeah, it's always this narrative that Muslims, they have accents in shows. They you always have that, like in 24, like the Muslim terrorist has an accent, and it's always there are others, and it was like, can we make something that's interesting, that again is not like too like cute, but really, really interesting, and kind of inform people, like Muslims arrived on Sapelo Island centuries ago. This is not new. It's not a new part of American society. It just was, the narrative was constructed in a way to keep them outside of what it means to be American by some. And let's tell this story. So back to Assad, and because he was the perfect vehicle to kind of talk about the history of Muslims in the US, but also about him after 9/11. He embodied these two things. And I think the fact that he's this kind of detective that finds all these incredible, small, random facts about Muslims. And again, he works with a lot of people here who have been doing this for centuries. Like, we're not trying to say no one has done it before Assad. That's not what we're trying to say, but this is one person who's uncovering these stories, and let's go on a journey with him, and like at the same time talk about the past, but the surveillance and what it means to be Muslim today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I feel like I didn't know like a lot of these stories. Like Ida's saying it so like perfectly. Like this is hidden information. Like I didn't know like like specific stories of people that were like in America such a long time ago, and like I don't know, just like it gave me like this history that I'm like, oh, that would have been cool to learn in school, but they don't want me to know that, so that sucks. So it's just like, yeah, like I'm so happy that people like him exist to be like, no, 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 no. This is, we were here. We were always here. Like it's so important. I could have listened to like an hour of him, honestly.
Yeah, and I think part of the segment with Asad is also so just interesting and just so vibrant and like fun to listen to. Because Ida, you use the word cute. It's not cute, but it's so interesting. It's just like, whoa. I knew a lot of what he was saying because I do this work on the day to day, and I took classes in undergrad, and that's the first time I really understood about like Islam in America. That was the first time, usually whenever my understanding of Islam was always it's foreign. It's not in America. It's out there. We all came here. But like listening and learning about that history, learning about how, you can go to really, really old churches in the South and you can find Arabic scrawled on the pews because they were writing, Surah Al-Fatiha, where enslaved Africans were practicing, they were doing like when you go on Hajj, they were doing the Hajj in the US because they couldn't make it to Mecca. There's stories of fasting and enslaved Africans also, the influence on jazz and so much in the US, and also highlighting the role of Black American Muslims. And I think often when we talk about Islam, and Muslim Americans, um, a big portion of that community is not included in the conversation, and Black American Muslims have been integral and central to the role of Muslims in America, and influencing and enriching American history and American culture and society itself. So that segment was able to capture all of that and then also capture that post 9/11 experience of being scrutinized and having your rights violated by authorities, and what that looked like. So yeah, that segment to me was just fascinating. And I think stories like that, I work in the space where I hear those stories, but I know that people around me, other Muslim Americans that I speak to, they have no idea that this has happened. And so this is a way for them to also learn about that as well. Um, as we're talking about the different stories, is there one storyteller's account that has stayed with you since you finished the project? And this is to both of you.
I would love, Yasmin and Sabine are really good friends. And Sabine, I would love for you to talk about your experience interviewing her and
Yeah.
having to be in the journalistic, in the shoes
Oh,
of a
that was
journalist, which
yeah. I was
uncle in Kentucky thinks you're a journalist now.
Oh yeah, my uncle in Kentucky, he was listening to me. He was driving Uber and he like listened to my story. He did like he wasn't looking for it. It was just like on the radio and he was like, "Is that Sabine?" And then he was just like listening to me for an hour and then he calls my mom. He's like, "I'm so proud of her. I love that she's going into journalism." And he's like, "This is exactly what she should be doing." And I was like, "No, I'm still a comedian. No, it's still comedy." And he's like, "No, I like the journalism part." So I was like, "Oh gosh." But like no, he was really really proud of me and I was so happy. But yeah, it was funny. I was like cosplaying Ida with Yasmin and like going journalistic mode. It was so funny. But yeah, it was like she's a good friend of mine. Like me and Yasmin have toured together forever. We've done so many shows together. She's like a really good friend of mine. I mean, just a soul sister. And oh my God, like I guess I'd never really talked about her origin story, okay? Like I didn't know her high school experiences. I didn't know what she went through as a very like publicly outwardly looking Muslim, right? With like a hijab and you hear about the struggles, you hear about it all, like you see it with friends and people in school, but like I guess I had such a different experience because I didn't wear hijab. So then hearing her tell me how she was getting bullied and how she stood up for herself, having that kind of power to go up to Ryan and stand up for this like Jewish girl and herself and like making him like shake in his boots. Like, I was like, whoa, she demanded respect. And I was just like, man, like my heart was like, if I just had like a Yasmin in my high school with me, like the way that would have reshaped my high school experience to just watch her do that and feel empowered immediately. Like, well, she can be big and open and herself. Me too. Like that would have been so lovely. So I just really I really felt her story in a big, deep way. It was just, I mean, she's just a powerhouse, and it inspired me so much. Even like in my day-to-day now, I'm like, you can be fierce. That's something that Yasmin teaches me. You can be fierce, you can be loud, you can be bold. And I carry that with me a lot. Like I just did a show in Orlando, and she's so bold even on stage. I mean, I have so many beautiful things to say about my friend. But like she's all, like on stage, she will wear a purse. She has like a little Palestine purse, which I love for the watermelon. Always bring it on stage. She'll wear like a beautiful outfit, decked out head to toe, nails done, hair did, makeup looks professionally done every time. Best outfit in the room. And this show was super, super fancy. And I know this is totally off topic, but I just wanted to share it because I really thought of her and I told her about it. And I was doing the show for like 2,000 people, a bunch of doctors from UPNA. And it was like a very fancy banquet hall. I had a very simple outfit. And I was like, no, what would Yasmin do? Because I was like, sometimes I can still kind of hide away, even while I'm on stage. And I'm like, what would the most bold person I know, what would she do? And so I went and bought this really elevated, fancy gown from the designer Zainab Salman. Beautiful, like the fanciest thing I've ever worn on stage. And I felt so bold. I felt so seen. I felt so there and like big and fierce. And I was like, this is amazing. She did it in high school. She does it in her day-to-day life. Like it was extremely inspiring to me. I love her.
From
Yeah,
listening,
yeah.
I just wanted to add from listening to Yasmin's segment, and I've seen her comedy online. She's very unapologetic about who she is. She's very much so, this is who I am. I am proud of it. And I think, Sabine, you said something there where you talked about, I'm not going to beg. Um, it was very much in the post 9/11 context. I found that the sort of Muslim American community overall kind of responded in almost of trying to convince the wider public that they deserved respect and they deserved belonging. And I understand that response in that environment. I think to compare it 25 years on now, Muslim Americans are demanding it. We're no longer begging to be accepted by wider society or convincing individuals. We are demanding our very rights. And I think, Sabine, you summed that up very well in how you talk about Yasmin. I think Yasmin was doing this way before us in high school, where she was demanding that respect from Ryan. And yeah, the word when you're talking about her and when I watch her, she's very unapologetic, and I think it's wonderful to see.
Totally.
And
I
and
mean,
I
yeah.
just wanted to add to that, very often people who are very funny are have a reason. It became a defense mechanism of sorts, to become funny. And I think what was really beautiful to watch, and because imagine recording with Sabine and Yasmin, both stand-up comedians, both are going to be cracking jokes every 2 seconds to get them to kind of like, okay, let's get the jokes out of your system, and then and now let's talk about the trauma that led to being
Mm.
funny, and I think that's really beautiful because they're both so candid in sharing
Mhm.
their stories, and I think people really needed to hear that. And again, I don't know if we mentioned this before, but it was a super mainstream documentary. It was broadcast in over 200 stations across the country in places like Iowa, Kentucky. So that was also the goal, is we knew that, people who would be listening are not people who are paying attention to these questions.
Yeah, and just so our listeners know, we'll be linking it, so be sure to check it out if you haven't. So final question for both of you. I want to bring it back to Muslim Americans because that's the topic and that's the focus of this documentary. What do you hope Muslim American listeners specifically feel hearing these stories reflected back to them?
There's so many things I want to say. The first word that comes to mind is probably what I want to feel. I want them to feel. I want them to feel empowered. I want them to feel powerful. And that this is home. Like it's home for all of us. We can make it home. It's like you don't have to feel like you're walking on eggshells anywhere. And even if you are, you can demand the respect. Like, I want them to feel like they can go anywhere, they can do anything here. Like, when I see Muslim Americans come to my shows, come out to comedy clubs, it makes me so happy. I'm like, yes, this is for you. This is your space. Get in here. Like, um, we have every right to be here and be loud and be really, really proud of what we do. And that's so much of me speaking to myself because I know how scared I was when I was little and I know how quiet I had to be. And I just, I want all of us to just be loud and proud. I really, really, that's the feeling that I get. And that's what I want for everybody. And yeah.
Yeah. And I think along with that, we have the right to laugh. And
Yes.
we need to laugh. Like we've got to laugh. We have the craziest experiences, honestly, when I talk to my friends and just talking to both of you, our experiences are just so vast. I mean, Ida, you talked about how you didn't even realize you were standing in line when you first came to the US and you're being on a registry. Uh, it's kind of like if we don't laugh, what are we going to do? Um, so having the space to have these stories is so important. And Ida, you do that in your work as a journalist, and Sabine, you do that in your work as a comedian. And I think both are so vital in dispelling the stereotypes and the harmful narratives that are out there and that have been out there for so long.
Yeah, and
Um,
I wanted to mention one quick thing because you just reminded me of it. Um, and answering your question again of what I want Muslim Americans to get out of this is I will say that like the thing that brings me the most joy is like when I tell a story about myself and in someone from a show slides into my DMs like a Muslim person and they're just like, oh my God, Sabine, that bit that hit home. Oh my God. I've no one's talked about how, they see moms give us boy haircuts when we're all little. Like, and I'm like, that's amazing. Like, that's a deep connection right there. And the weirdest one, like, how I'm like, I have an older half white sister because my dad had a previous marriage. And like, I'm having people in my DMs being like, I'm the older white sister in my family, of my Pakistani family. I'm like, what? And then there's all these girls in my DMs, and I'm like, get out of here. There's more of us. There's more people like my sister, like, that are half Pakistani, half white, and they have this like experience that it just like when I get a connection like that, it feels like magic. And
Mhm.
I want deep connection with my community and I want to know all the Muslims. I want to know everyone out here and to make them feel seen on stage makes me want to keep doing my job and makes me proud of my job. So that's yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you both. This has been just such a fun
Thank
conversation.
you.
And I'm going to tell our listeners to please do check out Storytellers. We'll link the episode in the bio. And Ida and Sabine, thank you again so much. Really appreciate you taking the time out to speak with us. And for our listeners, please check out for more information on Islamophobia, check out bridge.georgetown.edu. Have a wonderful day, everyone.